City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Richard Acritelli, and on today's episode of The Fog of War and Humanity here on HMTV, my special guest is retired Town of Brookhaven highway foreman James Henke will join me for a conversation about his major combat operations to fight during the Vietnam War. Jimmy, here we go. Let's get started. Where did you grow up as a young man, and what were some of your interests?
I was born in Long Island City Hospital, and my mom and dad had a home in Queens, and we had a home in Sound Beach. So after I was born, I went directly out to Sound Beach, and I grew up in Sound Beach town. My childhood was great. I was out in the boonies, and it was
A little different than Long Island City, right?
a little different than Long Island City, which I didn't have much of a taste of. But I really liked living out there. I'm 81 years old, and I've never left that town or those two homes that we have there. Growing up was quite a different scene from a lot of the people that came out for the summer. They lived in the cities, or they lived in Jersey, and they would come to Sound Beach for the summer only.
So you had like two different sets of friends. You had your friends that lived across the street from you, around the corner, somewhere on the North Shore, and then your friends that came out from the city or different parts that made that their summer home.
Absolutely. The summer kids that came out, they loved it out here. And of course, I was an all year round a guy who, loved to go to the beach and the candy store up the corner where everybody hung out. And then September came and they would all go home.
Now, where did you go to school?
I went to Infant Jesus Catholic School in Port Jefferson, Long Island. And my times there were probably brought me closer to what I thought of my religion. And the nuns were tough on us. They would keep you in line.
What was one thing that the nuns would get upset with you over?
Well, I was a comical guy. I always got into trouble. I wound up sitting in a garbage can with a dunce hat on most of the time. And, of course, the girls in the class would say, "Yep, you could do this. Why are you such a clown?" But it was the way you were back then. And,
Any rulers come your way or anything like that?
oh, rulers over the knuckles, pulling of the ears or the hair. The nuns were daughters of wisdom, and they were tough on us.
A little different than today, right?
Oh, much so.
So now you go to Infant Jesus. Now, what high school do you end up going to?
I wound up going to Port Jefferson High School because Rocky Point High School was not around at this time. It was only the Edgar School. So the school district sent us all to Port Jefferson for 15, 20, 30 years without a high school in Rocky Point.
And that was no different than people on Mount Sinai, Miller Place, Shoreham, Port Jefferson Station. I mean, Port Jeff, small school today, but it was big back 40s, 50s, 60s. It was the place to be, though, right?
So true, Rich. They came from Center Moriches all the way to Center Reach, to Stony Brook, over to the middle of the island, which was Medford. They had a high school, but everything Coram Way and everything came Port Jefferson High School.
So you had friends from a lot of different towns, right?
All over, yes, absolutely. Guys and girls from all over the vicinity of nobody having high schools came to our high school. There were 40, 50 buses online, ran all the way down through town, picking up students.
Now, what did you like to do at Port Jefferson High School?
Well, I was my second year of high school. I was fortunate enough. My dad was into mechanics, and we built a 1955 Chevy hot rod. And if you remember now, I graduated in '63, so a '55 Chevy was not an old car at the time, but it was a good hot rod, and we made it with a good combination of big motor, transmission, rear end, and it was always fun working on them.
And it gave you a little wrench time, right? You learned this is something that you enjoy for the rest of your life.
It is, and I today still have a hot rod. My son and I both built them over the years, and I had hot rods and I had street cars that were really nice. But my son in Rocky Point High School, he was the first one to come up with a monster truck. You have a lot of money in these things, and you have no money in your pockets, but you built them.
Sure.
So he was the first one as a sophomore in high school to have a monster truck, and then we went on to build him 8-second drag cars.
So that's a nice tradition. You worked with cars with your father?
Yes.
And your son Jimmy works with cars with you to this day?
Absolutely. Today's day is so much different than a carburetor back when I did it. He's into fuel injection, blowers. He has a Buick Grand National right now with a big Chevy motor, and he now has taken over everything. I just, my age, I'm not interested that much in it anymore, but it's fun to watch him do what he does.
Yeah, because he's the next generation doing this, right?
Absolutely.
3 generations of Henkes working and getting grease and, getting under a car or over it. And now, at Port Jeff, what else did you do at Port Jefferson High School?
I was actually in an auto class vehicle, working on vehicles, so they taught you even more so about auto mechanics. And I also ran track for Coach Benjamin, who was a big time, everybody knew him back then. And I ran pretty well running track.
It seemed like you were always in good shape, always active.
I was
moving, right?
I was thin back then, and it was it was easy to run. I was physically fit back then, which helped me later on in the war.
Now, in Port Jefferson, did you like the hustle and bustle of the town? Even though it's a smaller town, it's quaint, it's on the water, there was a lot of people that were there.
Yeah, it was a small town, but everybody that went to school there always seemed to, on the weekends, come back to Port with their families. And the football game, the rivalries between Patchogue and Port High, the Royals football team, was always a big thing. You'd ride through town with your hot rods and your girls in their convertibles up to the high school for the big game.
And you saw some good football, too.
Oh, some great football players come out of Port Jefferson High School.
Okay, now, you graduated from high school. What year did you graduate high school?
1963.
So now what wars kind of starting up in Southeast Asia at this time?
You had the Vietnam War brewing, and I was drafted late.
What were you working at? What type of job did you have as you got drafted?
I started at a high school with the Brookhaven Highway Department, and it was a great job. It had benefits, and I wound up staying there for 35 years. But I was drafted off the job, so they had to hold the job for me with benefits and time.
Which was important.
It was.
There's no great way of getting drafted,
right?
There's no real positive, but you have your job to come back to. Right. Plus, that time counted for you as well.
They paid into Social Security and to my retirement.
And it was a good government job.
It was a great job.
At a time where that area of Long Island was really growing.
Yeah, it was growing fast. And I worked in my own town, Sound Beach, and came home one day, and there's a letter waiting for me from Uncle Sam.
Now, let me ask you this. Were there any other family members before you that were in the military, during Korea or World War II, or had served at one time or another?
My Uncle Gerard on my mother's side, he was in Elliott. And he lived in Sound Beach with my grandparents and my mom. On my father's side, they wouldn't take my dad because he had children. So my dad was lucky back then, not to he tried, but he couldn't. But he was lucky enough to stay home and supported them. He was always a big supporter of the military.
Okay. Now, you get drafted. You know you have to go. Where do you end up going for basic training?
I met up with the draft board in Smithtown, which everybody went to on the island. It seemed out that way. And they bussed us into Fort Hamilton. And I had already been through my physicals and everything, got my draft notice, and now I was going. I was sworn in Hamilton, and they shipped us on a plane to Fort Jackson, South Carolina.
And that's where you did your basic training?
I did my basic training.
Is there anything that you're a Long Island guy from Sound Beach. You're a young guy at that time. You have a Long Island accent, right? I don't have when I was in the service, my accent was not good. And everyone knows where you're from.
New York.
New Jersey, New York, right? And is there anything that you remember from being a Long Island kid down in Fort Jackson, South Carolina?
Upon arriving from the airfield on a bus, the drill instructors were right in our face. And you didn't know if he was a sergeant or a general. Yes, sir. And I found out that they knew who you were real fast. New York, you have any zip guns? You shoot anybody? They knew New York was a tough place.
Yeah, some misconceptions because you grew up on the beach and
never knew Long Island.
Sure.
Never knew. So you bear with what they thought of you until they got to know you.
Now, the fact that you were a little bit older, did that help you out a little bit?
It did. Some of the recruits were 18 years old, 19 years old. I was 2 years old, 3 years older than them. Went in as a draftee. I tried to stay out of it, I'll be honest with you. I had car accidents and I was in bad shape, but they deferred you for a latter year. And I finally went into the service, not wanting, but I knew I had to do what I had to do.
Do what you had to do.
I wasn't going to draft dodge and run to Canada like some guys did that I knew. And it was the beginning of something anew for me.
Now, you go from Fort Jackson, you graduate there. Where do you do your advanced individual training?
At the end of my basic training, I did great on all weapons. I expert on this. I thought the better you did, the better job you might get, ended up in, and I wound up in infantry. They wanted a physically fit guy who knew how to handle his weapons, and I wound up going to light weapons infantry school in Fort Gordon, Georgia.
Now, was there any one weapon that you did well handling?
I actually expert on the machine gun, the M14, until I got to Vietnam. They gave us M16s, and the pistol of .45. I did.
Okay. Now, you go there, you graduate. Now, where's your next step? Where do they send you?
Out of advanced infantry, I was sent home for a week. And then I flew to Oakland, California, where I met up with all the guys that I trained with. And we shipped to Vietnam. I had orders for the 1st Air Cavalry. And being 67 was a hot year for losing people. We upon getting to our destiny with the 1st Air Cavalry, we were infused to the 9th Infantry Division.
So you were really at the start of the war, but you saw the large-scale expansion of it.
I did.
You were there with Americans from, not only from here that went to the Smithtown Draft Board, but clear across the country as well.
Across the country as well.
And you had a lot of Americans going to Southeast Asia. Now, when do you arrive into Vietnam?
I arrived into Vietnam the end of May 29th, beginning of June.
1967?
1967. And we were assigned to the 9th Infantry that was also assigned with the Navy Riverine Force. They were the boats that took us up the canals, like the old World War II.
Yeah,
our
the
forefathers,
PT boats, the Brown Water Navy.
right, dropped the front ramps and you ran off. They had fabricated some 250 of them in Coronado, California, and sent them to Vietnam for duty in the Mekong Delta. And General Westmoreland, who was a 9th Infantry Division lieutenant in World War II, had the flags that were in retirement of 9th Division activated, and all the units were sent, and the new recruits were sent to Fort Riley, Kansas, and then to Vietnam by February, March of 1967. And I joined up with them because they had so many casualties in the end of May.
Now, what kind of area is the Mekong Delta?
It's the most harsh area. You never walked on a solid ground like you would from Saigon up north. We walked in marshlands, water, mud, 24/7.
Rice paddies. And jungle that you went through were also so wet with marshlands. Now, in the service, you always have to take care of your feet. How were you able to, or was that an impossible thing?
It was an impossible thing, Rich. The Army kept it in your mind. Keep your feet, good socks, dry socks, but you couldn't possibly do that. Your jungle fatigue boots had air vents in them, and the water would rush right in your feet, putting new socks on or not. So your feet would curdle up, and your body and your skin would curdle up all the way up because you were crossing rivers, and like you stayed at the beach too long, and then your skin shriveled up.
If you remember in Forrest Gump, when they meet Lieutenant Dan for the first time, and after, Gary Sinise's character makes fun of him, like, oh, Little Rock's a fine town, right? He goes, there's 2 standing rules. One is take care of your feet, because the jungle and the terrain can eat up a grunt's foot.
Yeah.
And don't do anything dumb in terms of getting yourself killed. And
Absolutely.
then remember Forrest Gump goes, wow, I hope I don't let him down. But there's a lot of truth, though, in terms of keeping your feet protected.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you could carry extra socks in your fatigues. You would stick them up. But as soon as you got a chance to change them and put your boots back on, you were back walking in water again. So it made sense, but you couldn't do it.
And there wasn't much that you could do about it.
Couldn't do about it.
So now you're in the Mekong Delta. You're in the Brown Water Navy here. You have an interesting story because you're doing just about all you find on land, but you're getting there by the water. And was the military prepared to conduct these types of operations at that time?
No. They weren't prepared. The French had gone in there before us, and they got their butts kicked. And they never went in. There were sanctuaries of base camps that the North Vietnamese regulars were teaching the Viet Cong how to fight American soldiers in South Vietnamese Army. So when we got there, we were organized, and the Navy would bring us up those rivers on those fabricated boats that we talked about. They were called tangos. And around us were gunboats, which the enemy would shoot rockets at us, this and that, and they would
provide some security, right?
Providing security. And the Navy guys were mostly, when they were on a nice clean boat, they wanted to get to where the action went, so they actually wanted to be on those boats and left, and they were just like us, infantry. They bled the same way we bled, and we were in those tangle boats in the bottom of the bellies until they dropped the ramp, and then we ran off up into the embankments and into the jungles.
Now, what would you say about the fighting ability of the North Vietnamese Army, the NVA, and then, the South Vietnamese Communist guerrillas, the Viet Cong?
The Viet Cong in the beginning they had inferior weapons, the old fire. It just, they couldn't hit the side of a barn, some of them. But the NVA from the north, and of course Russia and China supplying with AK-47s, heavy-duty machine guns, SKSs.
Plus technical support too.
Yeah. They had better weapons than we did, actually. They could be submerged in water and come up and still shoot at us, where the M16s would want to jam.
Yeah, you were damned if you do, damned if you don't, right? With the M16, where it was a tough weapon to sometimes operate. And now, what would you say was the biggest thing that the enemy had going for them? Was it their weapons, knowledge of the terrain, ability to fight, combination of all three?
They had fought their whole lives, it seemed. You know, whether it was us, whether it was the Chinese, or whether it was the French.
Right.
And their ability on their turf, we weren't used to it. We were not prepared for jungle warfare. What they taught us in a basic and an infantry training, we never went through a jungle class like some infantry units did. They rushed us over there.
So then jungle, what is that, jungle land? Tigerland.
Tigerland.
Comes later.
Later on after the
And that
67.
comes with experienced instructors that were there.
Thank you.
And you didn't have any of that.
We didn't have none of that. We went there not knowing what we were
a
up
disadvantage.
against. Big disadvantage. We were on their turf. It seemed crossing those rivers, crossing the rivers, in order to, we had a job, seek and destroy, be killed or killed. And what happened was they knew it. They waited for us. They had an opportunity to hit us. They'd wait until it was just right, and then that opportunity came. They'd hit us with anything they had.
Where would they hit you guys?
They were hitting us from Woods Line up against the jungles while we walked across the rice paddies.
Would they try to divide and conquer, where they make you comfortable and then hit you right in the middle?
They are point men, and if you walked point, you either got hit first, or they let half the company go through, and then they hit it to divide the company in half. And that's what happened.
Caused a lot of confusion and
chaos, complete chaos. And being new at the company, you had to prove yourself to the guys that were there for 5, 6 months. They were case-hardened soldiers. We were new. We were like, oh my God.
What was your first observation? You're in the Mekong Delta, you're in the jungles, you're in the rice paddies, the mud, you're being brought, in terms of, the small vessels. Your first mission, what was you're a long ways away from Port Jeff and Sound Beach. It's completely different.
You're 12,000 miles away from home.
12,000 miles away from home.
Right. And now they take you by boat up a canal 2 hours away from any base camp, any life or American people, and they drop you off. And as you walk these rice paddies, they were sniping at you. And then if they hit you hard, you actually, if you weren't smart, they taught you in infantry training, if you freeze, you're dead. And I froze one time. And I got yanked down by a E5 who said to me, that's a good way of getting killed. And I watched guys bleed. I watched guys die. And you somehow recover. And my worst nightmare was June 19th, 1967.
We'll get into that in the second episode. I'd like you to come back for a second episode here with Jimmy Henke here on HMTV to talk about his extremely unique experiences fighting in South Vietnam.